was almost a thought experiment thinking like, sort of Rip Van Winkle thing. What if you like ran away from the world in 2016 and then came back in 2024 just thinking, well, hopefully that's all over. And instead, it's worse. You're right back in the thick of it. But Reese Kinnick is a former environmental reporter, former journalist like me, who gets fed up with his son-in-law, his conspiracy spouting son-in-law at one Thanksgiving, and after arguing over whether or not the NFL is rigged, um, throws a punch heard around the dinner table and ends up disappearing for years. Basically, he's had enough. He's fed up and he throws his smartphone out the window and goes and lives on some family property off the grid, away from everyone, hoping to get away from both the cultural insanity and his own problems that he's caused. So often, one thing I like to do is start with a character a little bit like myself. And so he does have some elements of me, a former journalist. There might be a rant or two that he speaks out loud that I may have thought in the back of my head. But he's far more cantankerous and less forgiving of people than I certainly am. So it's one thing I like to do with fiction, and I talked about the sort of thought experiment part of this, is to take a character and have them do almost the exact opposite of what I would do. It's like the George Costanza school of fiction. And having Reese, it's just taking like a heightened version of a lot of people I know who just really got fed up, not only with politics, but with technology, with just kind of with the state of the world, and taking that heightened version and saying, what if you took this out as far as it would go? And that's really the tone of the novel. It's heightened both comically and socially, and it becomes this wild road trip through the back roads of America. I love road trip novels, and I wanted to start with the inflection point right there. So he's been off the grid for about 7 years when Reese looks out his front porch, and it's the very first image you get is two kids on his porch, and he assumes they're there for their school, and he says, "Magazines or chocolate bars? What are you fine young capitalists selling?" And it takes him a second to realize they're his grandchildren. And I wanted something that shakes him out of the stasis that he's been in from the very beginning. And so it was a really deliberate choice to not show him, trying to build a compost toilet. And, we get a lot of that sort of in backstory and flashback, but I wanted to start right with the action to give him a quest, which is to find his daughter who's gone missing and to help his grandchildren who are kind of in the throes of this Christian nationalist fundamentalist church that Reese's son-in-law, whom he calls Shithead Shane, has joined. There are several other religious people in the book. This is not about religion in my mind. There's an Episcopal priest who used to be a boxer. There's some Unitarians. This is not about Christianity. This is about the nationalist brand of it that I think is a pretty I mean, I'm no expert, but it seems to me a pretty unchristian message, And if that is one of the things that the book writes about, I don't feel like I'm targeting or attacking anything at all. In fact, what I feel like I'm writing about is something we all live with, and I'm kind of amazed that more fiction writers are maybe afraid to tread there because we live with it. I mean, this is a heightened version of a Thanksgiving, but I think most people have probably had either with friends or family, they've noticed this fissure. And I remember reading fiction from the late 1960s when we had what was called the generation gap, when adults and young people saw the world differently. We have a much more serious gap. Now we have a reality gap. We're getting entirely different sets of information and news, and of course, we're choosing different things based on it. You'll notice in the book that it's an omniscient narration, so different points of view come in. And I knew I was writing towards Shane's point of view. Again, not to excuse what I think are misguided beliefs he has, but to explain kind of how he got there. And I think, I think fiction writes toward understanding. And so if Reese has a lack of awareness and understanding of how his son-in-law got there, by the end of the book, he'll be confronted with that also. And so I don't think it does any good to hide away and turn away. And in some ways, the whole process of writing this book was about me coming back from my own metaphoric woods. I had stopped looking at the news. I had turned away from stuff that was almost too painful to look at. And this whole book for me was about finding the road back. When you're writing a picaresque or a road novel, you want these larger than life characters to, to help your protagonist on his journey, his odyssey. And Chuck Littlefield is a retired police detective, actually sort of based on a cop who returned a stolen bicycle of mine one time. He had been exiled to the property crimes department, and to mess with them, he did the unthinkable. He started solving every stolen property crime he could find. And I filed that away when this cop told me the story, and thought, someday I'm going to use that. And this particular cop also has some emotional regulation issues, and for all that he has in courage, he may lack in preparation and decision making. So he's kind of a rash, bold character who's there to help Kinnick confront the militia people who eventually abduct his grandchildren. And he was a great fun character, right? As was Lucy, who is Reese's former lover, and they had a sort of office affair that sent them both in their scandalous opposite directions, and is possibly one of the most profane people you'll ever meet, which I loved about her. And then Brian, who is Reese's best friend. And it tells you sort of the state Reese is in, that his best friend has been mad at him for almost a year and hasn't spoken to him because he confessed his love for Brian's wife. So I wanted him to come back into the world and have to not only confront what happened in his family, but mend all of these relationships. Sometimes there are places that I have covered as a reporter or gone to in other forums. I haven't. I invented this music festival, the Payatiti Festival, based on Central American native, which I just found hilarious to have in the woods of British Columbia. About as far from where you could get, but it's not too exaggerated from some of the music festivals that occur in that region. And so, yeah, so, as a reporter, as a person, you drop into these things, you sort of file them away. One of the first things I covered was a case called Ruby Ridge, which there was a compound in the Northwest in northern Idaho. And so I was revisiting some of those places that I think exist in the Northwest, but really exist everywhere. And like I said, I wanted Reese to cross these borders. So he crosses the border into Idaho to go to the Rampart, which is the militia compound where his grandchildren have been taken. He crosses the Canadian border to go to this electronica music festival, which where there's no alcohol allowed, but as one of the characters says, but you can shoot drugs straight up your butt. And so the whole in both places, I wanted the world to seem sort of upside down from different vantages. And that cultural trip that he takes as he comes back into the world after turning away from it. Yeah, I wanted to be as fun and as wild as possible, and to create characters. They meet at a an acid and mushroom guide trip named Hefe Jeff, who becomes again an ally to Reese in trying to track down his daughter and rescue his grandchildren.